what exactly does creativity mean for you?
It means quite a few different things, really. It means, if you think about where you apply creativity, I apply it everywhere. I apply it in my private life, if I'm looking for inspiration, if I'm looking to solve a problem in a situation, or if I'm looking, when I'm coaching somebody, you know, how to be out of the box, of course, you know, that expression, or just to look at things from a non-ego point of view, you know, where you actually can say, okay, well, you know, if I'm from Mars, how would I look at that? You know, all of those great techniques. And of course, having been a de Bono trainer, all of those things come in handy as well. So I've got quite a big toolkit, actually. I think one of my core practices is meditation, for example. So I sometimes during that meditation, if I've been thinking about some issue, you know, I have a muse. You know, the old-fashioned idea was you had a muse that communicates things to you. So that's one of the ways I get really sort of amazing ideas. So that's one of the ways I practice it. The other ways I use is I'm in a creative writing group. So we meet once a week, and you know, the facilitator gives us a subject, and then your mind, then you just start writing. And that's amazing too, how ideas just seem to flow. Mm-hmm. So, you know, so the de Bono one is a very structured one that I can use. And then the other two that I use, if you like, which is open to inspiration, if you like. And the one last tool that I really love is whenever I get a problem, I have this little phrase that says to me, look for the gift. So whenever you get a situation that maybe is challenging, and you know, somebody would say, oh, that's awful. You know, how awful that happened to you, Glenn? And I go, no, not at all. This is, you know, there's a hidden gift. So I always look for the hidden gift in any situation that other people might find, you know, challenging or you know, unhappy with. And I've got lots of examples of those. One of them is how I went to Spain, which was incredible. Yeah, so that's a great one to share. I was living in Glastonbury for about 6 years. I had a huge library in the house that I was renting, and then unexpectedly the owner said, well, we want the house back, and it was a long lease. So originally my first thought was, oh no, I've got all this, you know, lovely library and very embedded in the society and the culture here, and so I started looking for another place to live, and the universe, of course, made sure that I couldn't find anywhere that was remotely acceptable. So then I said to myself, hang on a minute, your criteria, you know, look at your criteria. You're looking for a place to live. Well, actually, you have the globe, you know, and having traveled a bit from, you know, South Africa and my job, I used to do quite a lot of traveling. I thought, yeah, that's a sensible idea. Where would I like to go? So instead of being stuck in the one paradigm, you know, I have to live here or nearby, and having to hang on to my library, which was a big thing, I was able to abandon that and say, okay, well, what sort of life would I like to live, and where could I go? And then looking at resources, how to obtain that. You know, and that, I mean, that was a big one, but I tend to do that with whatever comes up, actually, is to look for outside the box, as we say, yeah? That makes sense, I'm sure. And I think, you know, I've trained as a shaman as well. So, you know, I'll get ideas in meditation or in the creative writing, and then I'll look for signs, you know, animals crossing my path, or I'm driving along and I see a signpost with a message on, or, you know, there are so many little hints that you can become aware of if you look for them, of course, you know. So that's, I think mindfulness is something that people talk a lot about today, isn't it? So I try to be mindful about even the little things that are happening around me. And it's absolutely amazing. I love synchronicity. If you start looking for, you know, or just being open-minded about what's happening around you, for me, the universe is like constantly talking. And sometimes I don't get the first one, but then I'll get another one. And I use dreams. Oh, that's another thing. I use dream therapy as well. I'm very keen on that because, you know, you'll get a couple of, I don't always remember them. When I do, I write them down. I look at the pattern, and then synchronicity will kick in as well. You know, so I'll get some theme from the dream, and then I'll, you know, be aware, and then something will happen, and that's definitely a message there. So that enables me to think out of the box as well. Great. Actually, another method I use, I think there's so many actually, and the only thing is people have superstitions or you know, things that they're worried about. So for example, my wife is a big tarot reader. I don't do the tarot, but I have a couple of sets of cards. One is the Dark Goddess, which is great, and I shuffle those every day, and then I get a theme, and I will then look for supporting ideas from that theme, which also, obviously, then you put the whole thing together, you know, synchronicity, you know, drawing a card, your meditation comes up with something. So I'm a great believer in using, you know, whichever one happens to be there at the moment. And I think one of the things that really works well, I think, is when you use something daily, as opposed to just dipping into it, you know, because I think that actually enables your, like, recording dreams, doing cards, meditating. It all opens up a bit of a pattern for your connection, if you like, that, you know, becomes then almost second nature. You almost don't have to try anymore. That makes sense? Yeah, hopefully.
Yes, it's like creating rituals, isn't it? You know,
Yes.
it's the rituals, a combination of rituals and spontaneity.
Yeah.
Seems to create a space for the creativity to occur.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so in terms of the external validation, though, because that's an important
Yeah.
element of creativity. So
Yes.
you talk about your work as a shaman, as using conscious, using meditation, so a wide range of different techniques that some people might call, you know, a little bit too out of the box.
Yes.
So,
I'm well aware of those people. I'm very careful in my.
Yes, yeah.
I'm very careful because some people are. I think it's partly the programming that people have been given about these innocent things that they've been, you know, subconsciously, whether from religious or whether from parental influence, you know, to be afraid of things. And I think that's, for me, is always to, you know, to look at, and I've done a lot of personal work too. So I think, you know, being objective, and I think that's what you're getting at to a certain extent as well, is being objective about things as well. So, you know, and I'm very lucky because my wife and I also have quite good discussions. And I think you could also do that with your coach or your mentor or something like that. We're lucky because we have each other to mentor. So we'll throw an idea around and sort of, you know, get a second view on that as well. Because I think sometimes you can get a little bit too, you know, you rush off with an idea and it's very exciting and energizing, but, you know, let's have a little bit of realism to check on, if you like.
Yeah.
My work has been working for a company doing training and development on a subcontract basis. But I know part of me, you know, my inner sort of, or my desire has been to do more spiritual work or more face-to-face work with individuals and groups on a, you know, self-development basis. So I went and had a tarot reading about a month ago at there was a fair here, and people were doing tarot readings. Actually, it was very nice. This lady had a course and she was allowing her students to practice, so they weren't charging anything. The students were actually giving the tarot readings. So I had a tarot reading from this lady, and you know, when they say certain things, you can ask questions, of course, and say, okay, well, you know, what about this? So the tarot reading was, you are in for a big change, but it's going to be positive, but I'm not sure when it will happen. I'm not seeing that. Okay, well, knowing that I've been having some, what's the right word, some challenges with my relationship with this particular company, I was well aware that things were not good in terms of the relationship. So it's made sense for me for quite a long time. I've had not just one reading, but several readings saying things are changing. And then I've looked at the real circumstances, and yes, things have been indicating a certain trend. So, you know, rather than say, oh, well, you're right, I always link that to reality and say, okay, well, what's this situation like? Do a situational analysis, if you like. And then you look at the interpretation and say, how does that fit? The one interesting thing, which was where she said, well, I can't tell you when. And I was looking at my decision-making process, and I was thinking, well, the interesting thing is, it's up to me, because I'm the one that has to say to the other to the company I work for, look, guys, it's time for us to make a change. And I think, and I've got a program of things I'm going to do, which are very solidly mapped out. So it was interesting how, if you like, there was some correlation. I think that's the right word, correlation between what you're given or what you discover or what creatively comes up. And when you look at it, a real situation, and you do a bit of a situational analysis and you compare the two and say, does this make sense? Of course, if it doesn't, if there are some questions, then one would investigate that question a bit more and say, okay, well, I have an open mind about this. What could it mean? And then look at the situation. And obviously, I've been a consultant and done a lot of business process re-engineering and things like that. So I've got quite a few tools which enable me to sort of list, you know, different possibilities. And so that's how I check up, if you like, the creative idea with whether it's practical or not. So you know, you do the analysis, worst situation, best situation, you know, most likely situation, and then look at that and see how whatever creativity was thrown up, you know, like the Spanish idea of moving. I had actually a friend who lives in Spain, in southern Spain. So when the idea came up to move, there was, you know, quite a lot of, if you like, correlation between the desire and the opportunity that made sense. It wasn't just like, well, I'll get on an airplane and go somewhere. The things were already in place. And so the whole thing said, yes, well, you know, the possibilities are real possibilities and not just imagined possibilities, if you like. And I admire people. I've always, I mean, I changed my career, just a very quick little background. I was an engineer doing large projects in Southern Africa, for example. And through various reasons, I was given the idea that maybe I should get into training and people development. So instead of giving up my job and suddenly becoming a trainer, which was actually not possible because I had a large family, I needed a certain amount of income, I looked around and thought, well, how can I do this and stay in my current job? Well, I found a job lecturing at the university in the evening, you know, and did that for a couple of years. So I think there are different ways of making that jump or making that change, you know, and, you know, that's another creative way of looking at it and say, well, I don't need to suddenly make this big change. Let me experiment from where I am without making too many changes and test it out and see if it works or not. And that can be a safer way of, you know, following the creativity. Of course, it's great if you can jump in. And that's another thing I've found is that when you make a commitment to a change, the universe seems to support it if it's going to be successful. You know, all sorts of other things pop up synchronistically, which say, yeah, here's something. Oh, there's something. Oh, this looks like we're going in the right direction. So yeah, that whole business of creating the synchronous confirmations about where you're going gives you a little bit of support as well. Of course, you know, making a decision, if it goes wrong, well, at least you've made a decision rather than no decision. And I think that's the worst possible thing you can do, is to make no decision and just hang about. There are times when you could do that, but usually make a decision, see what happens, and then if you made a mistake, yeah, well, you know, change your plan.
Yeah.
Been very interested in how, you know, there's that whole movement about, I'm just trying to remember the film now, but it's thought creates reality. You know, The Secret, that's the film. You know, everybody's sort of very keen on The Secret. And I think there is a lot of truth in that, you know, thought creates reality. In other words, what you spend time thinking about tends to manifest if it's, you know, if it's in the right way. But there are a lot of caveats about that, which I think the people who market The Secret are a little bit disingenuous with that. Although, you know, the idea is basically correct, I think. I think knowing yourself, I think that's pretty important, isn't it? You know, when you know yourself, you know whether, you know, this is in the right way for you. You know, so for example, an extrovert, if they had to do something which was very introverted, it would be a little bit of a sort of warning sign. Maybe this is not what, so your passion, I think, you know, you have that, we have that. Your passion is part of the process. Yeah. I remember a phrase saying, a magician must always be aware of believing too much in his own magic. And I think that's what you were talking about earlier on, where, you know, also a fair degree of skepticism, you know, which is almost like in counterbalance of creativity. You know, that's important. You know, I mean, the mad artist is probably a good example, and they are successful. But for me, coming from that engineering background, and then learning to be creative at the same time, I think it's important to get a balance. I think even if you are creative, as you mentioned, with the structure of being creative and implementing it, it's also a good thing to have a little bit of a balance in that process. I've done some NLP, I'm an NLP practitioner, and one of those golden rules, they say, is the environmental check. You know, how is this for your family? How is this for society? You know, so whatever ideas you come up with, you do a check, and they call it an environmental check. You know, how does this fit in? You know, it may be a great idea, but it would mean that, you know, there are no longer any men in society, for example, or something like that. You know, so it's an impossibility. Yeah, yeah. So that I think is quite a useful technique as well. Just check on what would be the effect with a number of areas in your life and other people and society. Yeah, yeah.
I suppose the essence, there needs to be an ethical kind of core to what we're doing, because you know, so there's a reason we don't know the future in terms of certainty, because if we knew, it might be overwhelming.
I think that's probably, yeah, I've cultivated having no fear to some extent, as much as I can, because I think, you know, fear of not being supported, things not going your way, you know, all those fears that a lot of people have that hold them back from doing things. I think that's an important thing too, is to have a belief in a positive universe, if you like, whilst being balanced. But I think that's a core thing for me, is looking at whatever I do as, you know, the universe will support me. It's a positive universe, in other words. Whether it's the right thing to do or not, that's something you check out. But if you decide to do something and it looks correct, then you can have an internal feeling that things will go well. You know, in other words, a positive aspect to life.